Okay, good morning, everybody. So we are up to the Mishnah. We're up to the third Mishnah on the Amud, the second Mishnah that begins on the Amud, on Daf Kaf Bet Amud Bet. Right? We finished up the previous section, the previous Mishnah out yesterday. So let's begin from the top of the Mishnah, fairly long Mishnah. Again, we're going through now the procedure of Makkot and precisely how this takes place. So the Mishnah says, Keitzad Malkinoto. How does this happen? Now, we've discussed why and when somebody would get Malkot. We've discussed how many Malkot somebody would get. Maybe we'll say a couple of words on that again. But now it says, how does the Malkot, how does this take place? Obviously, something which is not relevant, not practically applicable nowadays, but it's still Torah. So Keitzad Malkinoto. Kofesh Yadav al Amud. Heilach v'heilach. They would tie his, they would have an Amud, sort of a pole over there, and they would tie his hands in front of him, one on each side. The Chazan HaKnesset Ochez Bivgadav, and the Shaliach of Beitin, we mentioned yesterday how he's called the Chazan HaKnesset. Does not mean that he sings while he's giving him the Makkot, but for whatever reason, Rivan says, I don't know why it's called the Chazan, but that is the name. We find it in a number of different places. We find this idea of Chazan HaKnesset as a Shaliach of Beitin. That is what the Mishnah says that he's called. He would go and he rips off the person's clothes. There's an idea here we're going to see in the Gemara as well, that this Malkut, this is not a very pleasant scenario. And there's meant to be a certain element of bizayon. There's meant to be a certain element of disgrace, which takes place to the person over here. And that is why his clothes are taken off and he's exposed, and the Malkut are given directly onto his skin. So, meaning the Shaliach of Beitin grabs onto his clothes, and if they tear, they tear, and if they tear on the seams, then they tear on the seams. There are those who, as I mentioned, understand that this is not b'di'evet, but this is lekatchila, that he should rip off the clothes in order that they should tear. Until his heart is exposed, and that is where the Malkut are going to take place. Va'even netuna me'acharav. So there is a stone, sort of pedestal, that is placed behind him, behind the shaliach. Right? Chazan HaKnesset omed alav. So this shaliach of Beitin would then stand on the stone to give him the malkot. Urutzua bi'ado, and he holds the whip. Shel egel kfula. So it's two lengths of egel. It's made from leather from a calf. Echad l'shnayim v'shnayim la'arba. So it's kind of one which is folded over in two, and two together which are folded over into four. And together with that, you have shtei ritzuot shel chamor. The Gemara will discuss as well, why do you need strands of strips of a skin from a calf and from a donkey as well? But that is olot v'yodot ba, that are going up and down in it. So it's kind of, you have these two strips which are wrapped together, or that there are holes in the first one, and this donkey skin is sort of threaded through. That is how the whip is constructed. Yada tefach, v'rachva tefach. So it has a handle which is a tefach long and it's a tefach wide. V'rasho magat al pi kreso. The head of the whip goes round to the stomach of the person who's standing in front of him. Right, that's the length. Sort of wraps around. Umakeoto. So now when he administers the malkot, he gives him the lashes. Shlish milafanav, ushtei yadot milacharav. So a third, as we said, they are divided into groups of three. So 1/3 is going to whip him in the front, and 2 is going to be behind at the back. Now, when he's whipping him, when he's giving him the malkot, how does the person stand? It says, "Eino makeoto lo omed velo yoshev ela muteh." So he's not standing and he's not sitting, but he's sort of leaning forward. Ne'amar v'hipilo hashofet. That you'll sort of right. He's kind of leaning, sort of falling forward. That is what we learn from that he's leaning forward. That's what we learn from the pasuk. Where it says "Bipilo." And when he's whipping, he does it with one hand, as with all of his strength. The Gemara again is going to discuss exactly who is the one doing the whipping, how strong does it have to be. As we've already mentioned, Obviously not to the point, not to the extent where it's going to harm him more, to the extent where it's going to threaten his life, that we discussed yesterday, how there's the number of Makkot that's going to be dependent on what the person can withstand. But again, the idea is that this is not meant to be, it's not meant to be too pleasant. Not meant to be too pleasant either. Okay, so while they're doing this, while the Makkot are being administered, there are psukim which are read out as well. Now the Mishnah here takes it as a given that somebody is reading. It doesn't ask us how do we know that that somebody reads out the psukim. That's the Gemara is going to talk about it later as well. But it's just assuming that we understand that we know that there is somebody who is reading. And this is one of the dayanim, and what are the psukim which they're going to read? It's a little bit reminiscent of the first Mishnah we have in Shas, right? You remember the first Mishnah in Shas? It says Me'ematai korin kriyat shma. The Gemara there in Brachot, the very first daf, asks the question. Sometimes the Mishnah does this. The Mishnah just says something which is axiomatic. It says it is obvious, but it hasn't actually established for us how we know it in the first place. So over there, the Mishnah says, right, what time can we read Shema in the morning? What's the earliest time? What's the latest time? The Gemara says, wait a minute. What do you mean? What time do we read Shema? Who says you have to read Shema? How do I know that? And over there it says Tana Echakai. What is the Tana dealing with? It says Tana Krakai. I'll just tell you an anecdote, which is quite amusing relating to that. So once a story is told, somebody came to try and translate the Talmud. He wasn't so knowledgeable though. So he came to the very, very first daf. So it says, right, the Mishnah says, how do we know what time do we start reading Kriyat Shema? But it doesn't tell us there's an obligation. Of course, the Gemara says. So the Gemara says, what was the Tana based on? Well, we see the word Kai can also mean standing. So it says, so literally it means what was the Tana standing on? So he says the answer is he was based on a pasuk. He was standing on the pasuk. It says, you have to read Kriyat Shema in the morning and the night. So the Gemara over there says Tana Krakai. Kra can mean a pasuk, but it can also mean a pumpkin. So this person came along to translate the first page of Talmud, and that was how he translated it. He said, "Where is the Tana standing? The Tana is standing on a pumpkin." That is clearly not what the Gemara is trying to inform us. But the point is that so sometimes you have the Mishnah takes something as obvious, and then we have to understand what is it already based on. So here too, it's axiomatic. That they have to read out these psukim. How do we know who says they have to read the psukim? Okay, but we understand that they do. What are the psukim which are read while the Makkot are being administered? So it says, "Im lo tishmor la'asot v'gomer, v'ifla Hashem et Makkotcha v'et Makkot v'gomer." Right, that is the pasuk. You have it over there, two psukim on the side. That is very topical. That is relating to the idea of Makkot. Right, "Im lo tishmor la'asot את כל דברי התורה הזאת הכתובים בספר הזה ליראת השם הנכבד והנורא הזה השם אלוקיך והפלה השם את מכותך ואת מכות זרעך מכות גדולות ונאמנות וחולאים רעים ונאמנים." These are the psukim which are telling us how Hashem is going to punish you. It uses the word makot, which can mean different things, but Hashem is going to punish you if you don't go and you don't listen to His words and you don't follow His commandments. So those psukim are read. The point of this, again, of course, is not just to punish a person, but it's in order for a person to receive that punishment and to return to derech hayashar, not to repeat their transgressions, and to understand, to be chozer b'tshuva. So we want them to get that message as well. So he reads those, and then he then goes back to the beginning, and he says, "Ushmatem et divrei habrit hazot v'gomer." Right, that's the next pasuk which is read. Shmatem et divrei habrit hazot v'asitem otam leman taskilu et kol asher ta'asun. And then he finishes off. So there are, in other words, there are three sets of pasukim which are read. The third one is v'chotem v'hu rachum yechaber avon. It's very familiar to us because that is the pasuk which we open with Tfilat Arvit. Okay, we'll talk in a moment what the connection is between Tfilat Arvit and this. V'rachum yechaber avon v'chozer l'tchilat hamikra. And if this is still going on and they finish reading all the psukim, so they start again. They go back to the they go back to the beginning. By the way, just have a look at the Rivan here towards the end of the page, maybe four lines from the bottom. It says Vakore kore im lo tishmor hamipshat pshita landabai kriya. This is what I was explaining before. It says the Rivan, it's obvious to the Mishnah that we need Kriya, that we need the reading of psukim to go along with these Makkot. Where do we know that from? We know that because the Gemara says it elsewhere. It says, Kedamran in Masechet Kritot, Bikoret Tiyeh, Bekriyateh. There we learn out that there has to be that's where we learn out that there has to be reading Kriya of psukim at the same time as this. Right. So those are the three psukim which the Dayanim read at the time when they're administering these Makkot. So if I'll just share with you for a moment, have a look at the Tur in Siman Reish Lamed Zayin in the halachot of Tfilat Arvit, right? Says the Tur the following. He says, Seder Tfilat Arvit, Omer V'hu Rachum, right? V'hu Rachum Mechaber Avon, that's what we say at the beginning of Mariv. We don't say on Shabbos or on Yom Tov, but we say during the weekday. Why? Where does this come from? Tiknu lo omro lefi shebashacharit umincha yesh tmidin shemachaprin. Right, where this pasuk, right, is about kapara. It's about getting asking forgiveness for that which we've done wrong. It says shacharit and mincha are keneged tmidin. You have the tamid, the korban tamid, which is brought by boker or ben arbaim. Those are corresponding. Those are at the time of shacharit and mincha. So that is now that we don't have those korbanot, but we have the tefillot, and the tefillot correspond to that, and that brings us kapara. By the way, we mentioned this last week when we were talking about, but between mincha and mariv, when we spoke about tefillat arvit, right? So we said shacharit corresponds to tamid baboker, and mincha corresponds to the afternoon tamid. What does tefillat arvit correspond to? There is no korban tamid. There is no actually particular korban which tefillat arvit corresponds to. It corresponds to ekter chalavim ve'evarim, where you had limbs and things left over from the korbanot of that day, and those would be brought at night onto the Mizbeach. So it's that burning of those sacrifices that Tfilat Arvit corresponds to. Now, every week, every day of the week, that would take place after nightfall, with the exception of Friday afternoon. Because on Friday, obviously Friday night is Shabbat, and you cannot come and bring the korbanot of Chol on Shabbat. You can bring the korbanot of Shabbat on Shabbat. That's, by the way, a question, right? Because remember, when you bring a korban, there are melachot that are involved in that. Obviously, there is shchita, which is a melacha in terms of burning things up. That is a melacha, but nonetheless, so the korban tamid, the korban musaf, that is doche Shabbat. The Torah T'mimah points out in the Chumash that we learn out the melachot of Shabbat from the construction of the Mishkan. That the construction of the Mishkan itself had to be paused for Shabbat in terms of building, but the operation of the Mishkan, the day-to-day daily functioning, that was actually Doche Shabbat. Okay, interesting difference to think about. But in any event, so because on Shabbat evening, you could not bring the Chalavim Ve'varim, so there are those who say that since the Korban, so to speak, with which corresponds to Tfilat Arvit, was brought earlier on Friday afternoon, that is one of the reasons why we say, even though we normally daven Mariv after nightfall, if you want to daven Mariv early on Friday, you have a source for this over here. And there are those who say that it may be preferable to daven Mariv early on Friday. Okay, that was last week's Mincha Mariv Shiur. Won't repeat everything now. Refer you to YouTube if you're interested in that. But continues the other two. So we say in Shachar and Mincha we have the Tzmidin Shemechaprin. Aval Arvit she'en tamid lechaper. When it comes to Arvit, there is no korban tamid, so there is no kapara because we don't have that korban. Therefore, tiknu lomar v'urachum. So he says that is one reason why we say v'urachum at the beginning of Mariv, because there is no korban. Of course, the other reason is because of the terrible joke that when you're waiting for people to start and somebody says knock knock and you say v'hu, and then you can start davening Mariv. But the second reason, says the Tur, he says, Yesh omrim, lefi shenagu lilkot arvit la'achar shechatu kol hayom. There was a minhag, okay, we don't, I think fortunately, maybe unfortunately, we don't have this minhag today anymore, but again, not in Beit Din, but people would get Makkot, people would take Makkot as a kapara, and they would do that before Mariv. So for whatever chataim that they had done throughout that day, they would whip themselves. So the fishin agul kot arvit lachar shechatu kol hayom uva malkot mitkaper lehem, and with these malkot they would get kapara. Lekach nagul lomar achar malkot v'urachum, and that's why they would say the pasuk they would say the psukim which were said at the Makkot, which took place in Beit Din, that between Mincha and Maariv is the time people would get Makkot, and therefore they say this pasuk. V'gam, he says a third reason, since this is said actually 3 times when the Makkot are given, ki yesh bo yud gimel tevot, if you go through the pasuk and you count, it's got 13 words. Hooray! Like gimel pamim, you say 13 times 3 is tet lamed tevot, is 39. I says tet lamed or lamed tet, but in any event, this is 39 words. Kaminyana Makkot, that is the number of Makkot. And continues the Torah, Mer Shalech Tzibur Baruch Hu, and in Baruch Hashem Vorach, etc. So very interesting that we see this V'hurachum, at least according to some opinions, that we say in Ma'ariv is directly related to our Mishnah, is a remnant of the fact that people would still give Makkot. I heard once Rabbi Wein said he remembers that his father said that on Erev Yom Kippur they would still go in the afternoon and they would give the Makkot. Something I've never seen. I don't think there are many places that still have that minhag today, but this is something that was done.
You've said that mincha and shacharit mincha you have the korbanot. The truth is, we say our korbanot is Ashkenazim only shacharit. We don't say it for mincha. I remember I used to done with the Sephardim for about 13 years mincha, and they all said before Ashrei korbanot. So there right. It makes sense, twice the same day, and that takes care of mincha and shacharit.
Yeah, that's right. Look, if you're saying korbanot at all, you're lucky. I think most people kind of just skip over all of it. But that's correct, meaning that the Ashkenazi practice is to say korbanot in the morning, and the Sephardim say the korbanot at mincha as well, and that makes sense because that is again corresponding to those to the korbanat tamid. Right? The question is, do we say is it enough that the tefillah itself corresponds to the korban? The tefillah comes in place. Or do we have to actually say the psukim and read those korbanot? Right, the Gemara says that kol hasek b'torat olah ke'ilu hikriv olah. Right, anybody who is engaged in the parsha of olah or of chatat, etc., it's as if one has brought those specific korbanot. The pasuk in Hosea says unashama parim sfateinu. Right, there's a question discussed by the poskim: how far does this actually go? Meaning, to what extent? In Shulchan Aruch, you can see, right, if a person says, is a person allowed to read the korban chatat? If they're not chayav chatat, do you have to stand up or not? At different details. Another fascinating question which comes up is, if you have read those pasukim, and does a person have to go around with a notebook, or these days you probably have an app that could do it for you, right? To keep track of the number of korbanot that you have to bring. But is that a requirement? When we say that when we read the psukim and say the psukim of the korbanot that comes in place of the korbanot, does that mean that it replaces the korbanot literally? And therefore, if tomorrow b'mehera b'yameinu the Beit HaMikdash is rebuilt, that we would not have to bring any korbanot because we've read them? Or do we say, no, that is just second best, that's what you can do? Now, you can't bring the korban, so you need to read the psukim about the korban, but it doesn't act, it's ke'ilu ikriv korban. It says if you brought the korban, but you haven't actually brought the korban, so therefore you would have to, therefore you'd still have to go. So the nafkamina is, are we meant to keep track in our apps or in our phones or in our notebooks, etc.? One of the proofs, I'll just mention, one of the proofs for this is the Gemara in Shabbos. The Gemara in Shabbos talks about Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha, who says that the Mishnah says that a person should not to read lo yikra or haner, right? The candles they had in their days, where you had sort of the oil lamp, where you have a kli at the bottom which contains the oil, and then you have a wick which goes inside. And when the oil is running low, so the light begins to flicker. So a person would tilt the lamp in order that the wick should catch, and you could see the light. So it's brought. So the Mishnah says lo yikra adam or haner. A person cannot read in front of the light of the candle. Okay. Nowadays not so relevant. You have electric lights. You have even our candles. It's not the same as those. But so then there's a story, 2 Gersaot in the Gemara. But one of the Gersaot, Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha says, I will read and I won't tilt the light. And he read and he tilted the lamp. He was Machalel Shabbat. So then it says, Ani Yishmael ben Elisha, he writes down in his Pinkas that when the Beit HaMikdash is going to be built, he's going to have to bring a fat chatat. So Rishonim say from there, well, why didn't he just read the psukim of Korban Chatat? So maybe that's a proof that it's not enough, and you would still have to bring the korban. Okay, and there are other answers given as well, but that's an interesting question. So going back to our Mishnah now continues. What if we have a terrible tragedy that occurs in the Beit Din? We mentioned this, I think, back in the first Perek earlier on when we were talking about, maybe in the second Perek when we spoke about the concept of Ir Miklat. But here the case is as follows. We are now on the third last line of the page, right towards the end of the line. Says the Mishnah, "Ve'im met tachat yado patur." What happens if the person who is receiving the Makkot dies? And we've said we've spent 2 shiurim discussing how you know and how the Beit Din makes an assessment of how many Makkot to give. We said 39 is the maximum, but if you give, you have to give less if you can't withstand them. But what if the person, the Shaliach of Beit Din, is giving him these lashes and suddenly he drops dead? So we say he is going to be patur. He's going to be exempt. Okay, have a look at the Rivan. Rivan, 3 lines from the bottom, says in Metach Nido Patur, the Shaliach Beit Din who he is the Shaliach of Beit Din. V'amra now, we saw earlier on back on Daf Chet, Yatsa ha'av ha'maket b'no v'shliach Beit Din. But you remember when we learned the dinim of the arei miklat. So somebody who kills somebody else accidentally, it's a shogeg. We said it's only if it was engaged in an activity of reshut and not engaged in an activity of mitzvah. So there, the Mishnah said that the father who is hitting his son in order to discipline him, which again is not recommended in our times, but or the shaliach Beit Din, who, and there was discussion in the Rishonim precisely what the case is, but where he's fulfilling the mitzvah and he's administering these malkot, and the person dies from it. So the shaliach Beit Din is going to be exempt. He's not going to have to go to an Ir Miklat for that. That is considered that is going to be considered shogeg. However, continues the Mishnah, Hosif lo od retzua achat. But if he gave him an additional makkah that he was not meant to, v'meit, meaning the first case is not even shogeg. The first case is really honest, right? The Beit Din made the assessment. This person can receive 39 malkot, or he can receive 3 malkot, whatever it is. They said he can receive 3, and the Shaliach Beit Din gives him the 3, and on the third one he dies, or on the second one he dies. Right? That's not his fault. That's completely But if if he added in an extra one and then he dies, then yes, that is considered closer to that's considered that he needs to go. That's considered shogeg, and now he needs to go to an Ir Miklat.
Rabbi,
yeah,
Rabbi, excuse me. Is that you're explaining it? He gave an extra makkah, but od retzua achat means he put one more strip in the thing that he's going to hit him with.
Okay, so
instead of putting 4, he put 5.
Right. So right. So it says ritzua rather than makkah, but the Mufashim understand it to mean that he gave him an extra whipping. Now the question is, why did he give an extra? Meaning, so Beit Din said this person can withstand 18, and he's given him 19. Well, hang on a minute. Why is that shogeg? Right? If Beit Din said he can get 18, and he went along and gave him an extra one, what are you doing? You're killing him. So if he gave it to him on purpose, if he knew he was counting, and he came to this is what the Bartanura says, a number of other Mufashim say, if he intentionally gave him an extra makkah, that's shogeg karov l'mezid. That Ir Miklat is not going to help you. But it's if he got the count wrong, right? He knew he was meant to give 18, and he intended to give 18, but somehow, the counting went wrong. So he gave him 19 because he thought it was 18. That is going to be shogeg. That's how we understand that is the case of what we're dealing with here. Now, so just to say, in order to prevent this, we discussed yesterday, we discussed a number of times, the previous Mishnah, 2 previous Mishnah told us that we have 39 Makkot rather than 40, right? And Rabbi Yehuda said you have 40. So we saw how it's learned out from the Gemara precisely. But the Rambam, which we mentioned, let's have a look at it inside now. The Rambam actually says the reason you give 39, not 40, is in order to prevent exactly this problem. That's what we're dealing with. So he says it in a couple of places. Let's see the Rambam in Mishneh Torah, the Rambam in Ilchot Sanhedrin. Okay, Perek Yud Zayin. Here says the Rambam in Halacha Aleph. It says, "Keitzad malkinat hamuchayav malkot." How do you administer lashes to somebody who's chayav malkot? Kafi kocho shneimar kadei lishato b'mispar. Right? We say it's as if what he can handle. V'zeh shneimar arba'im. She'en mosifin al arba'im. Afilo haya chazak u'bari kashimshon. Okay, that which the Torah says 40, that is the maximum. You can't add on 40, even if he is strong and he's healthy and he can withstand more. He's like Shimshon. He can withstand 200 lashes. No, we don't give him 200, unless, of course, he's chayav more than one set. Right now, when we think about it, now we start to understand the severity. When we saw the previous Mishnayot said a person's done something, he's chayav 8 sets of lashes. Okay, he's chayav 7 sets for one thing which he's done. Wow, even if he's chayav twice. So this is a big deal. So each time, so if you estimate he can receive 39, he gets to 39, and then after 39, he's probably not going to be able to receive another 39 in one go. So you wait. This is the Mishnah we saw yesterday. You wait until he is chazak and bari again, however long it takes, how many weeks or months till he recovers, and then you assess again, and then you get the next set, and then you wait, and then you assess the next time. So this could be ongoing for quite a while, right? But in any event, says the Rambam, but somebody is weak, it gets less. Somebody is very weak, he's going to get lots of these lashes, he's going to die. That even the most healthy, he's only going to get 39. That if you end up giving him more, you're only going to give him 40 that he's deserving. So what do we understand from the Rambam? Essentially, the Rambam saying, you see here, he says that there might be a mistake. You might give extra. Now, if a person's meant to get 40 and he gets 41 and 41 is going to kill him, so then you're liable for killing him, or liable, or at least shogeg karov lemezid, whatever it may be. But if we say that 40 is actually the maximum number, and if he gets 40, so we give him 39. Why? In case, if you give him an extra one, you're still giving him, you're still within the permitted number, right? He says again, you give him 39. Because if you give him an extra, he understands that this is a real possibility. As they say, it's still going to be okay, because then he gets 40. That's actually the number that he was meant to receive, and that explains to us as well why the Mishnah and the Gemara keeps using this number 40, even though we're saying, right? We saw yesterday we talk about the Beit Din didn't omer that he can receive 40. Why do you keep saying 40 when it should be 39? Well, because it's less words, because 40 is easier to say than 39. No. Says the Rambam, because you see that he's able to receive 40, and that's why he actually gets the 39. The truth is, the Rambam says that, he says it more explicitly in his Perush HaMishnayot, the previous Mishnah which we saw. He says it over here. He says, right? Remember, the Mishnah learned out that the Torah says b'mispar arba'im. So he says, if it had said 40 in number, right, arba'im b'mispar, then we would understand that it's 40 full Makkot that you need. But kevan shekdim b'mispar, since it's b'mispar b'im, the number 40, the number close to 40, that's what the Mishnah said. Right? We see from here that the Torah does not want him to receive this entire number. He wants the number. It can be the number up to 40, but whatever he's able to withstand. It then says 40. That 40 is the maximum number. Chachamim omrim, כיוון שהמלכות אין אלא לפי יכולת סבלו ולא יותר על 40. Chachamim say, since the maximum goes according to what you can withstand, and the maximum number is 40, therefore lo nilkeu 40. Therefore, let's not go to the extreme. Let's not administer 40. Nash'il et hamakas ha'achat sayag. There you have it. It doesn't get much more explicit than that. He says, well, this is a sayag. This is a fence. We'll leave the last one out as a precaution. b'sayag b'miyut makot. In other words, according to the Rambam, it's different to the way the other Rishonim explain. It's not that the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda are arguing about how many Malkot the Torah required one to get. The Torah required 40. Come along Chachamim and say, Rabbi Yehuda says 40 is 40 is 40, and that's fine. Come along Chachamim and say, no, let's 40 just in case. We don't want to have a situation where the person we're going to get the count wrong and have an extra one is more than he can withstand, and then he'll die. So therefore it's 39, which may be 40 in case. That explanation of the Rambam also helps us to understand that the Gemara that we saw previously said, the Gemara said, how stupid are those people who stand up? Amarava, about 6 lines from the top of Amud Bet, right? The daf which we're on, said Amarava, kama tipshai shayin shay, how silly are they? The kaime mekame sefer Torah, lo kaime mekame gavar rabba. Those people who stand up for a sefer Torah, but don't stand up for the sages. And why? And what was his proof? What was his example? That the Torah said a person should get 40 malkot, and came along Chachamim and reduced it down to 39. So if you say that it was all a limud from the pasuk in the first place, and the Torah actually only intended 39, so what if Chachamim, what do you mean? What's the big deal that the Torah said 40 and Chachamim reduced it? Chachamim did not reduce it. Chachamim just interpreted what the Torah had actually said all along. But according to the Rambam, no, the Torah says 40. The Torah means 40. But Chachamim, in their wisdom, said 40 might actually become 41. Therefore, we'll reduce it to 39. 39 in case it becomes 40. And therefore, they are saving the person. There's also an amazing Rabbi Yonatan Eibshitz has a drash in Yaros Dvash where he says the number 40 and number 39, as we know, numbers which we find in the Torah are generally speaking related to one another. We find the number 40 comes up in a number of places. One of the places where 40 comes up is, we know that Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Har Sinai to receive the Torah for 40 days. So the Midrash actually says that the Midrash in Bamidbar Rabbah says that the 40 Malkot correspond to 40 days that Moshe Rabbeinu was on Har Sinai. And if you remember the Gemara in Shabbat, it says we have a machloket as to exactly when the Torah was given. Was it given on Vav B'Sivan? Was it given on Zayin B'Sivan? So the opinion of Rabbi Akiva is that the Torah was actually given on Zayin B'Sivan, meaning Moshe Rabbeinu they were meant to receive it, but Moshe Hosif Yom Echad Midato, that he added on an extra day of the preparation for the Torah, and then they received it a day later. So then, according to that, it works out that Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Har Sinai only for 39 days, not for 40. So in the same way that we see that over there, and this is actually the source of Drash about Perek, Hutna has an essay on this, and many discuss how the first sort of Din D'Rabbanan was really where the Torah was meant to be given, and Moshe Rabbeinu added. Over there says that Hashem agreed with him, and it was correct, but that he postponed the giving of the Torah by a day, so to speak. That was the Din D'Oraita when it was meant to be given, and then there was the Din D'Rabbanan when it was given a day later. So the 40 days actually became 39 days. So in the same way, says Rabbi Yonatan Eibshitz over here, the 40 Malkot becomes 39, 40 Din Torah and 39 Din D'Rabbanan. Okay, so that's something a little bit piquante for you. We continue. So there we see that if he got it wrong, he counted wrong and he gave that extra makah, so then the Shalach Beit Din in that case would be goleh again, because that's beyond what he was required and what he was meant to do. If he's just fulfilling the shlichut and he's just engaged in the mitzvah, and then it's a shogeg or really closer to anus, the person dies. Okay, then he does not have to go into the Ir Miklat. But there where he got the count wrong, there he would have to. Okay. Nitkalkel, last din of the Mishnah, last line of the page, last line of the Mishnah, says Nitkalkel ben b'ra'i ben b'mayim patur. Okay, there is an idea here, as I mentioned already, that there is a certain bizayon, a certain disgrace that takes place through this process of Malkot. If during the Malkot, it says Nitkalkel, the person was really disgraced to the extent that right, ben b'ra'i ben b'mayim, whether he had excrement or whether he urinated as a result of the Malkot that came out, at that point he would be patur. From that point, that he's had his disgrace, and at that point he's exempt. You don't have to give him any more of the Makkot, right? So the Gemara says bein b'ra'i bein b'mayim, says the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda says it's different if it's a man or a woman. He says omer ba'ish b'ra'i v'isha b'mayim. Says if it's a man, only if it is excrement that is going to be the degree of embarrassment, and therefore you could stop. Whereas by a woman it would be either case. Okay, so Ad Kan, that is the Mishnah. We'll just take maybe the first couple of lines of the Gemara, and then we will end today. So we're up to Daf Kaf Gimel Amud Aleph, the top of the page, second last Daf of the Masechet. Says the Gemara, it says over here, it says my tam. Right? What is the reason? Again, going back to the beginning of our Mishnah, which spoke about how you take the person who's getting the Makkot, and he's going to have his hands tied in front of him, and he's going to have his clothes ripped off, right? His shirt. He says, "My tama mishum nikla." Okay, because the pasuk says nikla. It says arba'im yaken of nikla chiche leinecha. You're going to give him 40 malkot, 40 or 39. It's just explained. Whereas nikla will be embarrassed. He'll be disgraced in front of your eyes. That is the concept there. Amar Rav Sheshet. Now we have a number of different maimrot the Gemara is going to bring in the name of Rav Sheshet. Amar Rav Sheshet mishum Rabbi Elazar ben Azari. Minayin laratzua shehi shel egel. Tichtiv arba'im yakenu v'samich lei lo tachsom shor b'disho. So says Rav Sheshet in the name of Rabbi Elazar ben Azari. Right? Where do we know? How do we know that the ritzua, that the whip has to be from an egel? It has to come from a calf. It's based on the pasuk. Based on the pasuk in Yeshayahu that says the pasuk says first sorry, we'll get the pasukim in the Navi later. But here it's in the Torah. The pasuk says so already saw this previously, that there is a juxtaposition of the pasuk regarding Malkot to the pasuk saying lo tachsom shor b'disho, not to muzzle an ox when you when it's working in the field. We've learned that from there previously. All the when it comes to Malkut, what kind of lav, whether it's a lav shein bo ma'aseh, or what are the categories, what are the criteria of a lav for which one would get Malkut. But over here, just from the fact that is related to a shor, so therefore that's going to tell us that you need the ritzua from that animal that has to come from a cow. That is going to be because an egel, which is a calf, is also called the shor. It's the same animal, and that is why the whip has to come from there. Okay, let's stop there. And we'll carry on from there next week. Have a wonderful day, everybody, and Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you so much. Shabbat Shalom.
Have a good day, everybody.
Shalom. Thank you.
Have a good day. Shabbat Shalom.